Amy Brooks-Kyle. I'm one of the co-directors of the CNC DP K-12 program. I particularly put effort towards the selection process. So if you have major complaints about the selection process, send them my way. So as part of that process, like everything else in the CNCDP, we want it not just to be a competitive event, but we want it to be helpful for everyone that is engaged in it, because as you will hear many times, if you come to the retreat, if it were our choice, we would fund everybody that applies for this program because we think it's so important. But we cannot, NINDS does not give us that much money. But what we can do is hopefully make the process as helpful as possible, so that everybody benefits from applying, even though we can't, unfortunately, fund all of you. So in that vein, one of the most important things we do is bring in people who are real experts in the various aspects of what you're going to be doing. Obviously, in this particular case, what you're going to be doing is writing an application. You've all submitted your LOIs and can now apply. So we want to help you create the best application possible. And part of that, obviously, is your preliminary data, but part of it's also grantsmanship. And nobody's quite as good at grantsmanship as Rick McGee. So we have brought you Dr. Rick McGee. Rick is a PhD Associate Dean for Professional Development at Northwestern University, Feinstein School of Medicine. In that role, his primary responsibility is to support the initiation and development of the independent research programs of early career faculty like you. His career path has been pretty unique. It began with 20 years of lab research in basic neuroscience and cellular pharmacology, and then evolved to designing and leading research training at multiple levels, up through MD, PhD training and early career physician scientist investigators. During this time, he's been developing new group coaching models to complement research mentoring. And one of the most impactful of this is, hopefully you will experience, is the work that he does in grant writing coaching groups. Generally, he leads a group of 3 to 5 faculty. We're obviously more than that, in real-time proposal writing and feedback over a number of weeks. You instead will get the crash course in a relatively short period of time. So he's done a number of other things, including significant diversity efforts, work on other aspects of professional development. He leads a team of social science and education researchers and an NIH-funded national longitudinal study of your life scientists. And he's also follows outcomes for PhD students in a novel career coaching experiment called the Academy for Future Science Faculty. So he's obviously been deeply involved in mentoring and grant writing skills at a number of levels, and we feel very fortunate that he continues to come back on a yearly basis to help our scholars develop those skills. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Rick.
Thanks very much, Amy. Basically, she's saying, I'm old enough, I've done a lot of things, and I get bored easily. Yeah, and that's me in a nutshell.
You should have done that summary for me.
I know, I could have just sent you that. He's an old guy that kind of gets bored and tries different things, but I'm also not afraid to try different things. I think that is one of the things that I've been really enjoyed, throughout my career is, let's try it. I'm not very bound by kind of, well, this is the way I've always done it. Well, that doesn't mean anything if that's not the right way to do it. So I'm looking forward to spending some time with you. It is a little bit of a crash course. So I guess I've got, 64 slides, but that actually for me is not bad for an hour and a half, but I will definitely, you'll have the slides afterwards too. So you're happy to share them. You don't have to make, copious notes as you go along the recording. But I also want to make sure I will pause. It isn't going to be an hour and a half of just listening to me. So really do want to get questions. We do want things you wonder more about, things you've heard. Is this really true? Those kind of things. So as much as we possibly can, also have plenty of time for any kind of questions that you may have.
Great.
So with that.
And I may have to drop off during the course of the recording. So if I do, please continue without me. It's just every once in a while this chair stuff impedes on the stuff I enjoy more.
Yeah. You've heard it before, Amy. So thanks very much for joining as you can. Some of us are smart enough not to get involved in the thing called chairs. I've got, I always, my whole career has been an associate of something. So here I have no authority, no responsibility. I get to do things that are fun, and nobody cares where I am. And most people say, "How do I get that job?" Well,
Oh,
I've had to
great.
create them.
Exactly. That is exactly what I want to know. How do I get that job? That
Yeah.
sounds perfect.
Yep, it is. So, all right. So let's jump into some slides here. Okay. And then I can go to this. Okay, so working okay. Usually Zoom is pretty seamless these days. Cool, that's great. Um,
See your
yeah, so
slides.
okay. The so I think, again, what I'm going to preface it is really this idea of, and Amy mentioned grantsmanship. Yeah, and grantsmanship is this kind of this catch-all for really it's writing for what reviewers expect to see. It literally is, you'll see grant writing is one of the most highly conserved, highly conditioned activities you're ever going to fall into. And it's the epitome of conditioned behavior. Reviewers are the most conditioned behavior beasts. They're worse than white mice. Yeah, I mean they're just completely conditioned, and they've got colleagues around them. If they get out of line, the colleagues will push them back into line. So it's really a fascinating kind of observation. But as a beginner, you have no idea what reviewers are expecting to see. So that's why a lot of this is really deconstructing and make the invisible visible, because it really isn't as complicated as it seems. So that's my goal, is to help you see what it is. Okay, again, I think just this is kind of my travel log, a world of different things. So I literally started out in the Midwest. I'm a Midwesterner at heart. And then spent a couple of years at, so here, when I was in, as old as I am, when I finished my PhD, basically the typical postdoc was 2 years. So I had 2-year postdoc at NIH, and then I had to have a job. And so it's very different than it was. But I really have evolved through some really cool things. So literally here at Northwestern, I call myself, I'm a faculty coach. I have this great job to literally, so mentors do it for free. I do it and get paid very well. That's the difference between a mentor and a coach. And I found a way that I could really help across a large number of people, more than just the people that I have in my own research group. So it's been really wonderful to be able to kind of move in that direction. So how did this come to be? It actually began now, it's almost scary, but almost 25 years ago, this whole process began thinking about and how do you actually help teach grant writing? And actually came about that back about that time, NIH, they looked at the trajectory of MD scientists, and they projected out they would be gone by about the year 2030, because it was a dying breed. So they realized they have to move into a real research training for clinicians. And they create these masters of programs. And from the clinicians they're put together, well, clinicians have classes. Graduate students don't have classes, physicians have classes. So they thought about this, well, let's create a grant writing class. And at the time I thought, you can't teach grant writing. But then as I watched this and the way it was, I began to see things that were happening when you did do it in a more structured way than the unstructured way that all of my training had been. And that's when I began really experimenting with teaching and learning and small groups. So what we're moving today is, rather than thinking of grant writing as something that mentors can hopefully teach you, I'm beginning to think of more of as a teaching and learning phenomenon. So I've been lucky. I had lots of people who gave me good feedback on writing, but that isn't always the case. But it really forced me to rethink how grant writing skills are taught and learned and acquired. And I actually started this first group I worked with postbacks. These are a group of young people between college and going to PhD, and really began to see how putting this into actually help with research design. So as you see, I talk about grant writing is a really critical way of actually getting a research design. The writing becomes a window into your thinking, and then you can have conversations about your thinking about the design. So that's one of the real values of writing. And I'm sure you'll be seeing this as you put your proposals together if you haven't already. And then I came to Northwestern back in 2007. But this methodology actually has kind of taken on a bit of a life of its own. I expanded through the AAMC and also through something called the National Research Mentoring Network. So we actually are just finishing up a 5-year UO1 and actually looking at grant writing coaching groups and different variations of them in an actual really randomized trial, design. So why is grant writing so hard to master? Think about how much you have to master first, becoming a scientist, becoming a clinician, becoming whatever you are now. Think of the content, think of the research design, think of the data analysis. Massive amount you have to master. Proposal would require now a very different way of thinking because it's now a complex integration of existing knowledge, research questions design, and this really unique form of writing. So when you're getting started, there's absolutely no reason you should know how to write a proposal. It's unlike anything you've written before. And if you've written lots of manuscripts, half the time we have to unteach people how they're used to writing papers to get a different style of writing for proposals. So think about it as a completely unique genre that you're moving into from the standpoint of writing, and it really is communication. But again, it's seldom been done, as a concrete thing to teach. So back when I was at Mayo, literally, one of my jobs was to lead a grant writing workshop. And in Rochester, Minnesota, in January, it's not hard to get people to come inside for a Sunday. But at the end of that time, I realized more people say, okay, now I know what I don't know how to do. How do I learn how to do it? And so I realized a single workshop like you're getting today isn't going to take you very far. It's only going to set up the kind of the framework of now how you actually practice and be doing it. So we're moving away from just mentors and self-learning. And especially because mentoring is an extraordinarily idiosyncratic process. Think of where you've landed with mentors and think if you landed even a research group next door, how different your experiences are. So research as a training design is extraordinarily idiosyncratic of where people happen to end up. And so the skills being taught are variable. Even worse, sometimes there's this explicit belief that, well, from some scientists, well, I figured out how to do it on my own. You have to show that you can figure it out in order to be legitimate, which is about one of the stupidest roles I can imagine. Makes no sense. There's no evidence to suggest that that's, any meaningful at all. But I'm going to give you a short a short departure into social science, my acquired science, throughout the years, because it helps to think of research and writing, and particularly review, as socially constructed. Okay, reading your gel, looking at things, Kaufman, that's not necessarily socially constructed, but writing and reaction to writing is. What I mean by that is to become skilled in any facet, whatever you're doing, you have to understand the norms and expectations, and those are socially constructed. And people become successful, people like Amy, people like me, we figured it out somehow, but half the time we don't even know what we figured out. It's kind of, you do it and you acquire the knowledge, you're successful, and that kind of reinforces it. And half the time people who have learned it can't explain what they've learned. So that's where mentoring begins to break down sometime, because people can't even explain why they do things the way they are. We all start by learning the norms of what we've done up to this point, but now it's thinking about grant writing as a next step of understanding the norms. And again, there's no way you can inherently know it, but because it's socially constructed, we can actually think of it from a standpoint of social theories, models, and constructs. So the one I want to introduce you to is called the communities of practice. So communities of practice is it's a whole, a kind of a construct that Lave and Wenger developed when they were studying groups that work together. So groups, and how is it that a group that works together, how do they actually, what brings them together? Usually there's a passion or a goal that they have, and they have this shared interest. But within that shared interest, then you also acquire a sense of competence. And with any community of practice, there's elements of competence that you are being judged on. You learn and being judged on. These can be techniques, beliefs. All of you, I'm sure you could think about whatever field you're in, how you've acquired those kind of sense of what are the norms. And a lot of them within a community of practice, you acquire them just kind of watching each other, learning from each other, sometimes in a structured way, sometimes in a very unstructured way. And these shared practices become really unique to each group. Okay, which is good because, but to be in a community of practice, your goal is membership. So to be a member, is you acquire enough of these shared interests and these skills, and people begin, hey, you're one of us. But if you don't acquire those perceptions of competence, you may end up being marginalized. Marginalized means you're kind of in the group, but you're really kind of not. People don't look at you as, okay, you're one of us. A lot of the different rules of social norms actually apply to this. So you really are trying to understand. So groups undergo membership organization. So thinking of communities of practice among scientists, biomedical science as a whole, PhD programs, medical discipline specialties, all of these are kind of act as a community of science. And there's challenges for newcomers. So in a sense, all of you are newcomers into a lot of what you're moving into, and again, how you understand those, are and what you learn them. And these challenges are actually seldom malicious or conscious. It's just the way we are, but we don't write. How many of you gone into a research group and said, here's a 5-page document of here's how we operate, here's how we work? That's actually one of the things we teach the most when we're teaching mentoring skills, is actually coming up with documents that say, hey, this is kind of how we operate, as opposed to hoping people figure it out within the first year or two in their group. But there are lots of strategies to lessen marginalization. Some of the things we're doing today is exactly what you're doing. We're making the invisible invisible. Sounds cool, great. Well, guess what? Reviewers behave as members of a community of practice. The community of practice of NIH reviewers, the community of practice of reviewers. And what does that mean? It means that when you're writing something, you're writing for a group of individuals who, consciously or unconsciously see themselves as a community. And these members have been highly conserved and reinforced for expectations. So this reinforcement is a really powerful social experience. So Amy and I were just talking, she's on a study section, and the first time you go to a study section, you realize how are people operating, but the group is really strongly socializes people into a particular way of being, a particular way of doing. And they're, consciously and can be and for pedigree. But for example, the writing style is highly conserved. We'll be talking about, you've probably all seen the specific aims pages. If I could find it after all my moving, the specific aims page I wrote in 1979, that's how old I am, wouldn't look significantly different than the specific aims page I would write today. Think about what that is saying. It's saying that that document is almost defining of NIH style writing. And that's how strongly it's been conditioned. So like in the writing groups, we may spend 2 months on a names page when we've got the luxury of working 3, 4, 5 months in preparation. To that, how powerful it is. But and revealing that you write that way is what's really important. So mentors reveal and teach to a lot, but it's not, but not always in the same way. And that's kind of what we're wanting to reveal to you today. Interestingly, NIH can attempt to shape and shift reviewer behaviors. Sometimes they're successful, and I'll show you one example where they're actually shifting something pretty big by 2025. So that's the backdrop. That's why, it may seem like what I'm presenting is kind of dogmatic. Hey, this is the way it has to be done. Well, after you've gotten your 5th R01, maybe you don't have to write exactly the same. But when you're getting started, it makes it a lot easier, actually, if you can understand the patterns that reviewers are expecting. Okay, but I think a few starting tenets I always like to start with is that writing research and training is not time away from science. It's actually integral to doing good science. Writing a proposal is where we finally push ourselves to sit down and say, okay, of all the things in the world I could do, why should I spend my time on this one? So it's the writing is really critical of designing good science. But it's a very complex skill that's best learned thinking of it as teaching and learning. And particularly, you'll see I'll be talking a lot about feedback and how do you get feedback that can be really helpful. But it's also really important to understand that the writing, high quality writing, will still not cover up for weak or inadequately developed science, or weak or inadequately developed mentoring, for example. So the writing is only allows the good stuff to come through. And poor writing can hide the good stuff that should be able to come through. But the other core tenet is feedback on writing, especially early writing, opens this window to science. And that's what we tend not to get many times in the feedback processes that we've typically been building into research training. So I'm going to give you an alternative model to think about, which is essentially the core model that I use. Okay, when do you start writing? Well, right now you're writing because you've got a deadline, so that's kind of obvious. That's an easy one. But I think what you still want to think about is it's really when you know at least what what you're going to write about. So many times for getting started on the science, I literally encourage people to start really basic. What are your research questions? What are your hypotheses? What impact will answer questions have on the field? Will anybody care? Literally writing those down, getting it from your brain onto the screen or onto a piece of yellow paper, whatever you like, is a huge change in how much you can engage in conversation and think about them. So literally starting very basic, from that side. It almost sounds silly, but half the time people don't do this. They just are writing a proposal. What's your research question? Well, I don't know. I just want to do this work. Well, you need to give me your questions. Then you can talk these through with mentors, colleagues, each other. Then you can begin to kind of outline an approach. Okay, again, strictly outline. This is not heavy duty writing. Okay, if this is what I want to achieve, what would be my approach? What would be the steps I'd actually taking? So a lot of this is really outlining before you spend a whole bunch of time writing detailed text. Again, don't get mired down these because it's this iterative process. You got to expect it that your plan A is, my kids would say, it's a throwaway to get down the ultimate plan you're going to end up with, because that's what you want to get to. Then from this, I'd say main time we move on to really looking at the specific aims page, because the specific aims page, this one page is literally a miniature proposal. And you'll see as I talk about that going through. And so then writing this one page miniature proposal helps clarify what's going on. But through all of these processes, the feedback on your thinking is essential. And again, this writing is window to thinking, but it's early phases. It's like a work in progress. I've been to research meetings or work in progress meetings. It's kind of like we're just getting there. The more you can get feedback, and the other thing, getting feedback on small pieces of writing, you get concentrated effort and time on something small. If you give someone 6 pages to write, you can get a half an hour spread out over 6 pages as opposed to half an hour over one page. So the depth you can get into is very different when you're getting feedback on early phase of writing. And it can keep you from going down rabbit holes. You don't want to go if well, that sounds good, but you know what? In order to answer that question, you're going to have 400 patients. We don't have 400 patients through here in 10 years. That ain't going to work. So you have others, because when you're just getting into this, you don't know what you don't know. And many times others can say, great idea, but this is a problem, or this is a methodology. Well, there's a new methodology that, unless you're using this new methodology, people are going to say you don't know the field. So all those kind of things come from this very early writing feedback as you go through it. Actually getting started in a K even is a little different. That's really how you start. You do that for the research part of the K, but equally important is a K is actually all about what are you going to be when you grow up. And literally a K is a pathway to something after the K. A K award is not an end, it's a means to an end. And literally, reviewers are hoping to see what this K would lead to in your own research program. Typically in the K, a regular 5-year K, you're writing for, okay, in year 4, this is the likely R01 I'm going to be writing. So it's a pathway, but it's not just pathway to another grant, it's a pathway to other skills you're going to have that you need for your program. Because the career development plan and how you'll be different after the K is at least as important as the science. There have been more K awards go down in flames from a poor, career development plan and a poor mentoring plan than there are in the science. So these two things have to synergize. The research actually is more fodder for your career development than necessarily you're going to change the field with a small amount of research money that you get from the K. So you've got to be thinking about these right from the beginning. Don't leave this to the end. It'll be a disaster if you leave your career development to the end, because that's equally important. So really think, what expertise skills do you have now? What new skills and new expertise will you need after the K that are going to be essential for your own program? always keep this in mind in the K. It's not just the science, it's about you investing in you for whatever period of time that the K is. 2-year K getting started, smaller amount. It's a full 5-year K. Okay, end of the 5-year K, I'm writing my R01. Kind of a thing is what you're thinking. And again, I would recommend make sure you outline your career development plan and your career development goals at the same time you're outlining your research. And if these two things don't seem to be in synchrony, something's got to change. Because if these two, like say, well, I really want to spend time learning to program in R, pick your language, but your research isn't doing anything that needs it. So why would you want to do it? Fine, do it on your own time. So really think about how the science and the career development are feeding together. Yeah, and it's asking a lot. A K is not a simple application. It's a pretty complex application, but it has a little lighter touch in the science. That's where it's nice. It's a little bit more. You don't have to save the world in the science, but it has to be something that will lead to a future afterwards. All right, let me take a quick, any questions? Anything before we keep moving on?
I just wanted to make a comment, and I think I heard this from you before, but I don't know who to credit it to, but one of the things that I remind K applicants about that I mentor is our awards are about the science. The most important outcome of an R award is the scientific results. The most important outcome of a K award is the scientist, right? So everything has to support your development as a successful independent researcher who will go on to have our awards that will have important scientific outcomes. But they have completely different primary outcome goals, and you need to keep that in mind as you write the application.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Critically important, keep that in mind. And it's, think of it as like, wow, what an opportunity. I can actually have a time to just think about me and me as an individual. Because especially coming through clinical training, it's like, everybody is becoming, it's so systematized, but now you can be you can be what you want to be. And I think it's a wonderful period of time. So what do you have to achieve? Before you think about what you're going to write, it's like, well, what's my goal? What do people want to see? You have to demonstrate the research is important, feasible, logical next step, and hopefully innovative novel. And I purposely, hopefully innovative or novel, because a K award typically is not highly innovative or it's certainly not going to be high risk. So a K award, you can't afford a high risk project that doesn't go anywhere in a K award. So typically, the innovation is not a high priority. It can't be boring, it can't be using just ordinary, but sometimes people think like, oh, I've got to make this the most innovative thing in the world. No, you don't. You got to make sure it's good for developing and leading into something down the line. You have to show you really understand the field. So all the writing, you give the signals to people, you really know it from the precise niche you're in, best techniques. You actually have to show you're working in the field. And so it's interesting, many times I'm working with a person, they may be writing a specific aims page, it's kind of beginning to gel, and I realize, well, wait a minute, you're not on this page. So somewhere, even at the specific aims page, you have to make it clear that I am in this field, not if you give me this award, I will now all of a sudden become, someone in this field. So there has to be enough sense that you are in the field. Doesn't mean you have to be highly published in the field, but you're engaged in the field, that you're already working in. Again, there's typically you're looking, the past predicts the future. So you're looking for your research accomplishments from the past, give some evidence that if you have the time and money, you take a good advantage of it. You actually finish things, you actually, publish as you go along. Again, you're ultimately showing a pathway for a successful independent R award. If it's a small K, you're writing for pathway to a larger K, but at the end of the day, there's a pathway towards an independent award. And then again, you'll see this idea of writing crystal clear. And you'll see in a minute, and multiple types of reviewers, particularly for K awards. Because again, the tolerance for trying to figure out what you're saying as a reviewer is very low. If a reviewer has to work too hard to figure out what you're saying, they won't. So it's really the clarity of writing, the clarity of communication becomes extraordinarily important. And all this kind of convinces the reader, you're kind of a future legitimate member of this unique community of practice called NIH funded, researchers. So again, it's all coming into this community. But it really starts by understanding review. We write for reviewers. And again, this is what you're beginning to move into. You're writing for what they're used to seeing, what they want to see, the criteria they're using to judge what they read, how they approach their task. And these are all the things that to understand that you're writing for the reviewers, you're writing for the task that they have been assigned. And their task is to make judgments. Their task is to say, okay, we think this one is better than this one. That's, they're getting to act God in terms of this one, when presumably when here's the evidence for it, because you have to turn the reviewer into your advocate. Because to do that, you need to make the work as simple as possible. You have to convince them that the work and you are very important to be supported. And it's really in this case that you're worth investing in. So that's your task, thinking about what the reader is thinking. Okay, but it gets worse. Because you're actually writing at the same time for different types of reviewers. This is particularly critical for K reviewers, because reviewers in K panels, think about it, you've got there's maybe one, there's one review panel that review all of your applications from soup to nuts. Okay, and so to have reviewers in that panel that can cover the entire field, it's a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of the actual expertise. So in that panel, you're probably going to have one, maybe two people that will be assigned to it. They know the field better than you do, because you're just getting started. But at least one, if not many times two, reviewers may not be a real expert in your field. So you have to write in a way that the non-expert, can be, in terms of maybe kind of close, but not, not really. And then you may have someone who really doesn't know very much. It doesn't happen a lot, I think, at the NIH level. It does a bit more at foundation levels, but then you're also writing for technical experts. There's going to be someone who, if you're using machine learning, well, guess what? There's going to be someone on that panel who's an expert in machine learning, and you have to write to them. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
No, just a point. So I have, expertise in epilepsy and some in child neurology. I get given clinical trial. I'm a basic translational scientist. I'm on the case study section. I get stuff on clinical trial readiness all the time. And I've been trying real hard to learn about it. But that's an example. Like, if you can't tell me why this is important, I am not going to inherently know.
Yeah, perfect example too. And you'll see that I'll be talking to him a bit. We always talk in funnels. You're writing in funnels. You're writing from the point where everyone can understand and get excited about what you're doing. And by the time you're down the tip of the point, Amy realizes she's in over her head, but she knows of someone else, but she's get the basics. She can follow it. She can evaluate it, because you're writing for her and you're writing for the people, who are, even more expert in the field than you, because you're writing for them. Again, if you're writing for research type proposals, many times you can get a feel for who are the reviewers in terms of the kind of expertise they have. And that we talk many times about how do you actually shape a proposal to a particular study section. You don't for a K award. It goes where it's going to go. In this case, it goes to Amy and her colleagues, so you know where it's going, so you know what their expertise is. But again, they're not all going to be absolute expert in everything that you do. Here, I forgot to check these links. These links may or may not work. NIH keep moving their guidance for reviewers on some of the videos and things, but you can search for them. NIH does have some pretty good videos on peer review if you want to look at them. Review criteria. Okay, just briefly, starting to give you a sense of what do we mean by review criteria. These are the review criteria for our type awards. And they're, and the five, we call them 5 component scores: significance, investigators, innovation, approach, environment. These are all independently scored from 1 to 9, 1 being perfect, 9 being awful. And then somehow people come up with, but here's my overall impact score. But they're not all created equal. It's not a mathematical average. But you're really looking at these are the criteria people are judging it by, and you're actually writing for the review criteria. You'll see in a second is very different for K awards. I most want to show you these because you'll see how different they are. As we said before, the difference between writing a pure research proposal and a career development proposal. So these are actually words. When you have criteria, particularly the NIH, these are not just abstractions. These are words. These words are printed on the review sheet that everyone fills out. So it keeps reminding people, here's the criteria. Now, these were changed by, I guess, maybe about a dozen years ago and brought in. So does the project address an important problem or a critical barrier to progress in the field? Within 6 months to a year of this being put out, what words do you think all of a sudden started showing up in NIH proposals that had never shown up before? Barrier to progress in the field. Okay, if that's what the reviewers are being asked to judge, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to hope you figure it out. I'm just going to lay it out there. So it's a very transparent form of writing with regard to criteria. So again, as we look more deeply into the K criteria, these are real and these are what people have been conditioned to. Because when Amy writes a review, she has to write in some kind of criteria, and it better make sense or her colleagues are going to look at her sideways. There's huge social pressure to do it in a way that makes sense. So it's much easier just to write in a very simple way. So each of these will have words behind them. You spend some time to look at the words. And I'm not going to spend any time with these, just show you, but there are words behind them. Not my words, these are NIH's words. Okay. However, sound great. Well, guess what? Coming in 2025, for just to give an example of things that can happen, all of a sudden in January 2025, they're going to change it rather from 9 scored criteria to 2. Factor 1, importance of the research, which combines significance and innovation, scored 1 to 9. Factor 2, rigor and feasibility, the approach, scored 1 to 9. So really only 2 scored criteria that then somehow get important. The factor 3, with the expertise and resources, is being evaluated either sufficient or not. And the reason they're doing this is that it's designed to, a whole lot of weight has been going on to, well, it's from Harvard. We know all at Harvard you'll get this stuff done. Maybe lousy science, but there's way too much weight being put on the history of an investigator or the prestige of the institution. So they're trying to move that out. So that if you look at it, factor 1 and factor 2 has nothing to do with the investigator or the location. So this is actually NIH's push to try to to level the playing field. It's about the science. It's not about where you're lucky enough to have ended up. Okay, so they'll do these kind of things. They're changing the fellowship, but interesting, they're not at this point changing the K scoring. So again, as Amy and I were talking earlier, it's a more complex scoring, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. All right, there are the K criteria. Don't look anything like the R. And that's, again, we want to emphasize how different it is. And we'll walk through each of these so you understand and say, well, what are they talking about? And I call the K as a very unforgiving mechanism, because all it can do, anyone that at these is weak, it can drag an application down. So everything may be great, except all of a sudden the career development plan really doesn't say much, and it's very poor. That alone will completely drag down a K application for a number of reasons. Number one, it says it's just plain isn't very good. Number two, your mentors are not helping out enough, or they wouldn't let it look this lousy. And so all of a sudden it's a double hit because it's the package that they're looking at. So all of these pieces have to come together. Again, they can look very different from one application to another, but you have to realize they're all critically important. All right, so what does this mean? Here are the words from, and the last one you saw, they're kind of simple words. The words about the criteria are actually quite extensive. So here are the actual questions a reviewer is supposed to be answering when they're doing their review. Does the candidate have the potential to develop as an independent productive researcher? Are the candidate prior training or research experience appropriate for the award? You can read them, but a couple things you see as you read them, what really pops out in numbers 1, 4, and 5 as an independent investigator. So now think to yourself, if you're sitting on a review, you've got a K application in front of you, how are you going to assess if this person has potential to become an independent researcher? Think about that. How would you actually do that? It's not that as easy as it sounds unless you give people evidence. So an independent investigator means someone who is able to work, come up with ideas, develop the ideas, problem solve, troubleshoot, see things that someone else doesn't see. These are some of the elements of independence. They may not come out, well, I've got 7 publications. I've got a first author on 4 publications. Well, that's great, but if those are aims 1 and 2 of one mentor and aim 3 and 4 of another mentor, that may not be evidence of independence. So you're really working to help our reviewer understand, where am I from the standpoint of independence? So it's productivity as well as independence. So this is what you're trying to pop out. So you're really telling your story. And this comes about from the standpoint of you're giving data to the reviewer. And that's one thing. As you sit down to write, think about what you're actually, what you're writing is you're presenting data. Here's the data. Here's the data about me. Okay, here's the data about my pathway to where I am from some point to where I am today. And that path is what a reader is trying to understand. And it goes just beyond listing of a bunch of things to the logic and contributions. And so where you get this, your story comes from an interplay between the biographical sketch, which lays things out in a very structured format, and your candidate background section, which is a major section in the actual application. And these two, in a K application, they can kind of work together and say slightly different pieces of the story. What you don't want to have, hopefully, is here I say one story, here I just repeat the story. So you can think about how the different elements can do different parts of the story. And again, there's no one way to do it. But it typically is helpful to have both the idea of logic. How have you developed? How has your interest come about? Because believe it or not, people are actually interested in stories. When we read these things, we are curious about, well, how did you come to be where you are today? And if there's a logic, if there's sometimes there's a pivot. I thought I was going to be a urologist for the first years, and all of a sudden I came across this case, I learned about this, and wow, I want to make a change. Those are fine. Those kind of things are just fine, but tell the story so that people know that there's a logic and because it has more meaning from where you are today, if I can understand the meaning of where it came to. Ideally, there even can be a logic. Sometimes it's not logic. Sometimes not purposeful. Sometimes like, oh, my eyes, I just discovered something I love. Solving difficult technical problems. If you come into a research setting and people couldn't get something to work, all of a sudden you got it to work, bring it out. Those are the kind of things that if you don't give me the data, I can't consider the data. So it's really important to bring those kind of things out. I'm one who believes that if there have been any bumps or delays along the way, I think in general you want to be the one to bring them out, because otherwise all a reader can do is imagine. One of the best, I think, stories I remember that I was working with someone who was actually from another country. He'd been in the U.S., he'd been going good, and he'd doing great training. All of a sudden, he had a family emergency, in the country where he'd been from. So he left and had to go away. And then 3 years later came back, and he thought, I have no chance. And kept trying to tell him, no, the fact isn't you left. The fact is you came back. And the fact is, what you're doing while you're there, keeping and the fact that you're back, that's the story. The story, but you tell the story. You don't apologize for doing what life needed to be done. You bring it out. So those are the kind of things, it's real. Everyone's been through life. Life happens to all of us. So you really want to, I think, if at all possible, you be the one to do it. This is a place, though, where I think some people have a hard time writing about themselves. Especially if you've been conditioned at all, be in the background, or, it's really hard to bring out, sense of, it can feel like I'm bragging. It's not bragging, it's data. You can write it in such a way that the magnitude comes out without necessarily feeling like it's bragging. But this is a place where sometimes if you know you're going to have trouble, get help. Just acknowledge someone to say, okay, I'm having a hard time letting this come out in a way which I think really highlights what I have accomplished. And so sometimes get help with that. Okay. Any questions on you and writing about you? And that's the core element of, that's why we start with this. It's like, where are you coming from and where do we think you're going to go? Nope. All right. I'll keep going. Oh, sorry. So here is the career development plan. you can read the questions. Those are the questions that reviewers are supposed to answer. And it's really, does it make sense? Do you have all the pieces in place to go from where you are today to where you're going to be after the K, and that's going to be valuable for what you want to do in your independent career? So these are all pieces of that. And again, there's some fairly stylistic conservations. Typically in these, you'll have some kind of a diagram or a table that shows how the pieces all fit together. But it's really, like I keep saying, start with the destination, work back. The skills you have now and the new ones. So you're almost like when you're writing the candidate background, you're running from here's how I got started, here's where I've gotten to today, here's what I'm really good at, but here are the things that I need to be able to do what I want to do after the K. So again, your timeline, it's like the foreshadowing of exactly why I need the things that are coming. So a lot of grant writing is foreshadowing, it's layering, it's kind of, here is where I am now. This is here's the next thing you write. So you're foreshadowing the story as it comes along. Yeah, and again, depending on a small or full K, it gets right next, because what you have to, I always encourage, even if you can during these and even build into it, smaller research grant submissions, because it's great to get practice. And if you write for and even build it into your career development plan, is perfectly viable. During this time, I'll be writing for small institutional awards and getting feedback from my mentors. It's the practice, it's the design, and by demonstrating that, I got $10,000 from this competitive small grant application. The fact you got it is probably much more valuable than the money. The fact that you've been through peer review, people have seen, you've told your story, they say, yeah, you're worth investing in. So that's one thing to build on during, to whatever extent you have during the K. And it's not inappropriate even to build that into, a career development plan. Each of the mentors has to contribute in some way to your change. Okay, so you have to have, when we talk about the mentors, you have to satisfy what I call the 4 criteria: who they are, what they're really good at, what are you going to get from them, and how are you going to get it. Those are the 4 components of having a mentor. And if you can't fill that in, then, well, why are they there? So again, you have to really, and you don't want them all doing the same thing. In fact, you'll get reviews back, well, it seems like these two provide the same thing. Why are they both there? So you're really looking at what each of the get. You can start building collaborations. And again, your goal isn't to be everything. Your goal is to be really good at something and be really good at collaborating with other people who are better than you at other things. So again, don't be afraid of making it clear, these are the kind of people I'm going to be collaborating with. I'm going to be working with a lot of statisticians. I'm not going to be a statistician, but my goal is to really develop the skills to work carefully with and guiding the work in the collaboration with statisticians. A simple sentence like that gives absolute image to a reader in terms of, okay, I see this, and now that makes sense of why it's there. So the design of this is typically, it's a so career development is a combination of structured and unstructured. A combination of classes, there may be workshops, there may be scientific meetings, they're actually defined elements that you will learn. And the other big piece will be the actual mentored experience and how you will build with mentors, get the, and ideally if you have a class, okay, you take a class, but now you're going to apply it. Because we all know taking a class doesn't really mean you're skilled in something, it means you're ready to start using it. So always think about, if you got important elements that you learn from classes, now how you're going to operationalize that as part of the research. That's the best synergy that can come to play. And sometimes if you're moving into a new, slightly different field, you're building and going to national meetings in that field. So now you begin to understand the field, you become a scene in the field. So that's, again, even going to carefully designed scientific meetings is all part of your career development plan. I haven't said it before, but just before I forget now, ideally get an example of 1 or 2 funded proposals like a K, because that will give you some structure, but don't get too many, you'll go nuts, because they're not, they can be different. I'll get confused on how, well, which one's better. Get some idea of structure and then build one for yourself. The research plan and the criteria just keep getting longer and longer. I think just from the very beginning, are the proposed research questions, designs, and methodologies of significant scientific and technical merit? That's the biggie. is this designed well? Is it done right? Is it going to be lead to what you say it's going to lead to? And again, this gets into, well, what's the prior research? What's the rigor of prior research that you're building upon? Just like is the rigor of what you're planning to do being done in a rigorous way? So this is the idea of rigor that NIH has brought into it. Again, these are all the things that are there. These are NIH's questions. The other questions that pose to a reviewer, these are what in a reviewer's brain when they're reading your research plan from that standpoint. And again, you see all kinds of different things that are built into this. So, and you're never going to, try to kind of create an answer to every one of these, but this is what a reviewer is trying to answer. So it's really, again, the research is aligned with your career development. It's an important question. It's a question that's worth investing in because even if it's about you, but if you're doing research that isn't going to have legs, that isn't going to really be seen as important by the community, you can't afford to do it because if the farther you go, the more behind you'll get. You have to be starting with a piece of research, a type of research questions that the field will care about and that will have some legs. Okay, that's a core element, and that's why it's not going to, it's not going to solve world hunger, but it is going to be an important enough question and set of questions upon for which you to build a career. That's what you're looking for. Okay. And how are you going to use collaborators? And if any of you are working on things that are close to what your mentors are working on, you actually have to be very conscious of how are you going to differentiate you from them. So for example, if you're working on, some kind of a huge data repository and it's a very unique data repository and your mentors have created it, okay, what are you going to do when you move across country to a different institution? You can't build a career based on somebody else's data repository unless it's such a huge thing as nationally available. But just be careful to differentiate that what you can be is something different from your mentors and that you're not too tied to a current resource that you have access to. Typically, it's going to follow the same format as our proposals. It's smaller. I mean, it's like almost the research format of an R21, which is a 6-page research proposal. You've got, it's even smaller than that of how much you have to write about it because it's roughly 6 pages that you have in addition to the aims page. Again, it's a substrate for your development. Ideally, I always argue in any kind of research, and particularly here, when you're thinking of the research direction, if it's linear, that's great. But if it's only linear from the standpoint of you have to keep moving and getting certain answers to be viable, it can be kind of limiting. Ideally, it can come that your research program can be branching. Okay, as I develop this answer, it will ultimately can go there. It can ultimately go there, depending what happens, and also depending on new technologies. But you have to avoid what we refer to as the dependent aims, which is make or break. In other words, if aim 2 is dependent on aim 1 working, that's called a fatal flaw. And you don't do it because it means that if aim 1 doesn't work, you have no rest of the proposal. Now, if aim number 1 is I will come up with something. It will be defining something, and whatever comes out of aim 1 will guide where aim 2. That's not dependent. That's where they're just working together. Or oftentimes, in more basic science, sometimes here's your core question. Aim 1 comes at it this way, aim 2 comes at it that way, aim 3 comes at it that way, where you're now triangulating several different approaches around a core question. So again, they're different research design, but you have to avoid one where, well, if aim 1 doesn't work, I'm out of luck, because that's what research reviewers don't like. As if there are challenges, and if it is a little bit, you have to come up with several different alternative approaches. If you have a primary approach and it's not completely clear it's going to work, you better have 2 or 3 alternative approaches all lined up waiting to take that direction. I think the let's see, anything else I want to say about this? Again, once you get into the K, though, I think sometimes people feel a little too constrained that, well, the only thing I can do is what I said I'm going to do for my K. Well, sometimes research, that's why I call research. We don't know what direction is going to go. So even if you're in the middle of your K and you have some peripheral directions or it suggests something dear, your K isn't a straitjacket. You can't. I've had people have like they're proposing a clinical trial, small clinical trial as their aim 3. Well, what they learned in AIM 2 said a clinical trial would make no sense whatsoever. I'm certainly not going to throw good money after bad, so research can change. But the only thing NIH will say, that's fine, we expect you to follow the science unless it takes into something that they call out of scope. So if all of a sudden you're working with this and you want to go, start looking, you're in rheumatology and all of a sudden you have an idea to work in cancer, probably not going to do that. But again, even not something quite so dramatic, that just be a little cautious. But few people run into that in K, but don't feel too constrained by the K. The other criteria: mentors, co-mentors, consultants, collaborators. I call it the cloud. And here are the questions that the reviewers are being asked. Are they, do they have the qualifications? Can they adequately address kind of potential strengths? And this is the letters that they submit. Is there adequate description of the quality and extent of the mentor's proposed role in providing guidance and advice to the candidate? Here's one that people many times run into, that you all of a sudden have a real synergy of something you want to work with a pretty young, an early career investigator or a junior investigator, and you want them to be your primary mentor. You really love the science. They've never mentored someone like you before. They never mentored a K person to a productive career. Okay, that's okay. You can go with them, but now you bring in another mentor who they've done this over and over at time. So it's the combination of all the mentors that meets all of your needs. No one is going to meet all of them. So that's why so that a more experienced person plays that role together with a primary mentor. So it's that package of people. They're all coming together to provide all the different things that you could, work. The fourth is the mentor's description of elements of the research relevant activities, including formal coursework, adequate. Well, since most of the time you're going to be writing whatever the mentors are saying, well, you want to make sure that you do say the same thing. Yeah, you'd think that's kind of a silly statement, but the number of times that you may go through iterations, oh, I've written my career development plan, now I'm going to write my mentor's letter. Oh, wait a minute, I'm going to change my career development plan, and you don't go back and change the letter. So, and just make sure that and also again, we shouldn't be this way, but it's real. If you're having to write these other things, absolutely apply enough time. It's extraordinarily difficult to try to give guidance to 4 different people on how to write different things and make that sound like it's one of those silly little things that when reviewers, they know that probably the candidate has written most of the drafts at least of these things, but anyway, but just allow enough time and make sure that these things are saying this, these pieces of evidence are saying the same thing. Again, lots of other pieces of this. Take a look at it. When you start looking at this, you've got to have enough active research support for whatever you're proposing too. So that's got to come in the institutional support. So I call it the mentoring cloud, and those are the 4 elements of each. And so typically you may find that for each of the primary mentors, you have a paragraph of about maybe 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches. We measure writing in inches, not in words. And so you have a nice compact description for each of these people and the role that they're going to be playing. So you can go bing, 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 bing. Got it. You want this to be really simple and easy to read and with minimal repetition. Environment and social commitment to the candidate. The chair's letter says, Jane Doe is a fantastic, young investigator, and if she gets this grant, we will be happy to give her a faculty position. If that's the letter you get, please don't submit the proposal. It just wastes people's time. That's called another fatal flaw. Just simply won't happen. But your job is to get enough sense of commitment from the institution, and the more the better. The more specific, whoever can make the commitment, whether it's a department chair, whether it's a dean, or it's a division chief, someone who controls space in the purse strings has to be the one who says, this is what we will give this person. And it needs to be as much in black and white. the institutional facilities and training. You're not going to go and just work with a person. You're going into an environment. So you really want to capture the kinds of seminars, the kinds of other meetings and things going on, other kinds of training and whatever things. You're capturing the whole environment they're in as part of that. So you're looking for what's the milieu. I'm just looking. Is that something in the chat, Amber? Oh, nope, that's just from Amy. Okay, great. Okay. Um, and again, I think that's where you want to give enough details, but sometimes if you go to your research office and you're saying that, well, I want some information on resources, they'll give you a 25-page document that goes everywhere to the number of volumes in the library and all of these core facilities. And you're not using any of these core facilities, make sure you only include the stuff that's relevant for you. There's nothing that will tune out a reader faster than having 25 pages of stuff. I'm not going to wade through that and figure out which of those things are actually important for me to know about. So make sure you tailor, make sure towards your giving a sense that there's a community that I'm going to be developing in, not just within one research group. And again, is there assurance that it intends the candidate to be an integral part of the research program as an independent investigator, irrespective of this award? What's got to come across that even if you don't give the person this K award, we don't care. We're completely invested in that person. It'd be great if you did, but we're invested with or without the extra award. That's the tone that you want to have come across. And in most cases, your K awards are going to be ones where you're going to be staying at your own institution where you are now. There's some K awards, some K01s, some K24s where people are. It's like you get the award and then you go shopping, to find a good position. In your case, and those are a little harder to write. In your case, you're going to be staying where you are at the vast number of cases, so you're really documenting how committed the organization is to you. So it's really you're telling a story, from the standpoint, and literally we many times like in the research, well, I'm not getting the storyline. What's the storyline? I'm getting a bunch of pieces, but the pieces are not coming together in a story. So you're really trying to think about how you're actually writing a story. And I'll come back to some of these tools in a minute. Let's see. Okay. So just briefly in terms of the basic sections, hopefully you've all seen the specific aims page, but what's really, this is what the aims page has to accomplish. All of these things, what's the problem? Why is it important? What's known from others' work your own? What new information we have to uncover? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And in most questions, what the specific hypotheses that you're testing? Okay, that in a half a page. Then you come down to the bulleted specific aims that goes on to say, okay, now let's get specific about here's exactly what I'm going to be doing, broken into pieces that I can understand based on the amount of time. And all these things have to be, calibrated for the amount of time in the actual award you're asking for. Then you have impact statement. More often than not in a K award, the impact is on you. But it doesn't spend a lot of time in the aims page because people are thinking science in the aims page. That's why I simply say a nod to the career development impact. So many times we'll be writing where in this little short, paragraph or a couple of sentences, and while completing these aims, I will also acquire new skills in X, Y, and Z. That's enough foreshadowing for a reviewer to know, okay, this is the kind of extra new skills of the person coming out while they're doing the award. I know I'm going to have lots of time to read about it, but just give me a little nugget, so I have the full picture. Because basically, most reviewers will tell you by the time they're reading this page, they've kind of made up their mind with regard to the science in particular from the standpoint, and the mind from the standpoint of this sounds like really kind of interesting stuff. I'm looking forward to reading more towards, I guess I have to keep reading so I can come up with why I don't like it. That is how quickly people are making judgments in reading these grants, especially in our awards. I think it's a little slower, a little bit more holistic with K because there's so many other pieces. But in our award, absolutely people by the time it's two buckets that these are into. Yeah, and again, and why it's important. And again, still it is, why is the science important? The aims is really is about why is the science important, because again, you have to be building from this into an actual career. And make or break or enthusiasm. Then you've got this research strategy, which the sections are still the same, they haven't changed, but it's they're the significance and innovation. Significance is many times I like to think of it importance. Why is this work important? And just, historically, actually, the section was called the background and significance. So back when we used to write 25-page proposals, you'd have 3 or 4. Basically, it's a review of the literature, and what NIH discovered is no one read them. And so they just got rid of the background and just called it significance. But it really is, it is a background. The significance isn't just a statement of why it's important. It's the buildup to why what you're proposing to do will be significant. And sometimes people get too narrowly thinking about, oh, just, well, why is the field insignificant? No, it's why is it what you're proposing to do will be significant. So it really starts with enough of the background to build the case for this is why this is an important topic. Here is where the field has gotten to. Here is where the field needs to go. And guess what? Here I am. And that's the kind of the logic you're building into that. So it's really building the logic for why what you're planning to do is going to be important to do. Okay. And typically you can think of it, you've got this much on the aims page, it expands to this much. Okay, so it's a building, and the more you keep the same organization, the easier it is cognitively for a reader to keep following and developing. Okay, the aims page got me this far, this has got me this far, then I'm going to go more deeply into exactly how you're going to be doing, keeping the logic, keeping it simple, making even to you know preliminary data, if, for example, if what you're proposing to do is really dependent on preliminary data, sometimes you actually will see preliminary data in the significance section. But more often than not, you'll see a preliminary data section at the beginning of the approach. For K, you're probably talking a page to a page and a half for your significance. That's about as much real estate as you can afford for it. Okay, but reviewers realize that's all they're going to get because they know there's a lot more coming. Always keep in mind that work must be significant, even if it's not highly innovative. And that takes us to innovation. And innovation is this thing, it's novelty. But innovation is innovation in many different ways. It may be in new methodology you've developed. It may be in taking a methodology and applying it to a different field. It may be, so innovation takes many different of many different forms. But my experience is that sometimes people get confused between innovation and significance. So many times we'll have well, here's my innovation section. By the time we're done, well, no, this section is why it's important. This is innovative, this is novel, this is more by what's important. So people can get kind of conflated between what's significant and what's innovative. The more you can keep the innovation really targeted, if you have 1 or 2 or at most 3 bullets of here's an element of innovation, probably people should have known it already. I'm just kind of reminding you this what's innovative. Less is more when it comes to innovation in most cases. So if you're putting things in that really are not about innovation, they're really about significance, it can actually dilute out the sense of perception of innovation. So particularly for the K, it's not a scored criteria, and actually beginning in 2025, it's not going to be a scored criteria of its own as well. Because all the data shows that innovation as a scored criteria is one of the least correlated with the actual impact score. So reviewers were not putting a lot of weight on impact, so they just took it out and converged it in with significance. Then the approach basically is just going right down the line, say, okay, here's maybe some preliminary data. Here's aim number 1. Here's how we're going to achieve it. Aim number 2, how we're going to achieve it. Again, your mentors, these are the sections that usually are almost the easiest to write once you know the actual direction you're going. It's a little bit more like a typical scientific writing as you go through it. Candid background. I'll leave these with you. I think we've kind of talked about it in terms of how you build this story. Ideally, how it works together, kind of synergizing the biosketch. But if you think about the biosketch, you got that whole sections on contributions to science. We don't want to repeat those whole bloody sections in the candid background section. Sure, telescopically, you're kind of alluding to those in a bit more of the true storyline. Okay. I'm going to leave these. I want to make sure to get something. You'll have these, look at them, some suggestions on construction of the different pages and plans, because I want to get to a idea of, okay, this is teaching and learning. How do you really write this way? And so I want to introduce you to are some tools that we developed in, along with a colleague named Carl Keller, now I guess probably about 10, 11 years ago. And Carl, so I got some money from NIH. In this business, if you stay in long enough, you create what's called pathological grant-seeking behavior. If there's money on the table, you can't help yourself. You just have to go after it. So back in the previous economic disaster, NIH was giving you billions of dollars. Go spend it, stimulate the economy. Well, there's no way that NIH can put out a whole new RFAs or something. So they said, okay, we're gonna give it in supplements. So I said, aha, supplements. So I had a grant. I was looking for ways I could kind of help teach grant writing. So I put out, they got some money, put out this ad, and looking from, I wanted to help in creating enduring materials for people holding research grants. And Carl Keller, he picked it up, and he said, he said, I teach, he has his own business. He actually teaches communication skills in big corporations that I could never afford. We got some money from NIH. And so the first thing Carl said, okay, you keep talking about these grant things. What the hell is a grant? He had never seen a grant in his life. He was not a scientist. He was an expert communicator and writer. So I gave him, some funded proposals. He went away and said, okay, no problem. This is easy. And so what Carl introduced us was the difference between rhetoric and English. I know back in when I was in college, you could either take English, freshman English, or you take rhetoric. I could never figure out the difference, so I took freshman English. Finally, Carl explained, English is a language. Rhetoric is how you apply it in a particular setting. And so every field have their own rhetorical ways of writing and communicating. So what Carl introduces us is to the rhetorical patterns of NIH-style grant writing. And so this, if you've never seen Lake Michigan in Chicago, this is looking south along the, what are we? along the western shore of Lake Michigan. So down there is the main city. And this is a professional development program I had with graduate students for a number of years. If you go into resources and under written communication, you get to this page. And each of these links is to about a 15-minute YouTube animated PowerPoint. We actually have our own, we have the Climb YouTube channel. Nothing's gone viral, but some of these have probably 20 and 30,000 hits. So that's not too bad, I figure, for a communications. But each of these are really quite different. A couple I want to point out, the 5 principles of writing readable sentences and the creating coherent paragraphs, those two 15-minute videos completely transformed the way I write. No exaggeration. So from a general writing in a highly effective, structured way, spend the time on, again, 15 minutes well spent. But the one I want to make in particular is the under Ames pages part 1, rhetorical patterns. And what Carl did with these is he took actual Ames pages. These are funded proposals, and he mapped them into a purpose. They mapped them into what, as a communication element, what is being conveyed. It's like eukaryotic innate immune system act as an effective barrier to infection by microorganisms. Understanding the mechanism that bacterial pathogens employ to circumvent innate immune system will improve our ability to control disease. Nice general context. My brain has opened up this, this Ames page. It's landed on the Ames page. My brain wants to know where I've landed. Here it is. Here's the landing point for this Ames page. Read that, got it. Okay, and then each of these goes down and starts creating these things like Carol pointed out, these are funneling, and each of these different elements. And if you go through them, and again, 15 minutes, what Carl does is he maps these Ames pages in each paragraph or sentence in terms of what role it's playing. And I want to caution you in terms of, on the bottom it says a qualification stress. We happen to pick, a couple that had much more on those, on that than you will need to have. And the only reason you do that is if someone is skeptical, if you know they're going to open up your application and you're writing from a place that they may never have heard of, right there in the Ames page, you say, okay, I know what you're thinking. We can't do this. So right on the Ames page, I'm going to tell you why we can. And so I'm going to force you to call me a liar because I'm saying we can't. And so you're always thinking about what is the reviewer going to be thinking. And that's when you're giving something. So you're not going to wait until 4 pages in. You tell them why you think, because the damage has been done at that point. They've made their judgment. But in most cases, you don't want, there's too much. So don't replicate those. But what Carl did was when he mapped these two, guess what? The pieces were all the same. They both had funneling, but the pieces were arranged in different orders. I think as you go through and listen to it and watch it, and you end up with, here's the anatomy of the top half of an Ames page. These are the elements that a reviewer has been conditioned to expect, because number one, they've been conditioned to expect them, and number two, it's actually answering all the questions that they're supposed to answer from the standpoint of the research of the proposal. So this becomes kind of now a map that you can work with, and now it's not, it's not all that it's obscure. It really isn't. And if you spend a few minutes looking at it, that's exactly what you'd want to be understanding. It makes total sense. But until we broke it down this way, it was a little hard to make it visible. That's why I think spending the 15 minutes on the video is going to help you quite a bit. Okay. The way to think about that is those rhetorical patterns, I would argue, just carry right through. So you've got a miniature version of those patterns on the top half of the Ames page. They just expand in the significance and the innovation. So again, it makes a much easier way of knowing how to write in a way that people are expecting to see. All right. Any question on that before I spend another 5 minutes or so and tell you, okay, now you know how to do it, right? Just go do it, right? You've just mastered. You've watched your tennis video, you're now playing Wimbledon. Yeah? Isn't that how it works? Right. So any questions before I break off into kind of helping you think about how you can actually, get some help in doing this?
Dr. McGee, thank you so much. This is fantastic. I had one question regarding the, mentors that have worked with, an applicant for a longer time. For those where you have seen, successful submissions, is it helpful to outline how this particular mentor has already contributed to an applicant's career development, and then say, and for the next 5 years, I expect this mentor to contribute to these and these and these steps, and then that will be part of the mentoring team. So, sometimes there is, I think there is, there's pros and cons to having a long-term mentor. But I think your point was really important.
My guess is you've been sensitized to that already. It's a great question. It's a wonderful question.
Yeah, and the challenge is sometimes that there's often, in our field, like pediatric neurology, it's challenging to find someone at the same institution. So it's often just like one or two, a handful of people who could potentially serve as mentors in that field.
Yeah, and I think that's what you hit it right in the nail. It has pros and cons. And I think the longer you have worked with somebody, the more you have to be explicit about what are you going to get something different from them versus how are you going to complement them with different people. And that's where I think the pandemic has actually done us a great service, because now people can no longer say, well, they're not at the same institution. How could they ever work together? Well, duh. We would do it all the time now. So actually, huge uptick in tolerance for people being at other institutions. So that's why, and you actually acknowledge it. That's where I'm saying, okay, I know what you're thinking. Grant writing is a whole lot of it. It's a thinking. It's metacognitive in terms of, I know this is an issue. I know you're going to think about it. I'm going to call it out. I'm going to say, yeah, we worked together to a great deal, a tremendous amount from working together, and in the next step, these are the new things we're going to do, but now I'm going to be complementing more. Sometimes it's been bad enough we've actually had people go literally purposely jettison the mentor and find a new one. And many times mentors are okay with it, but you're right. In a very narrow field, you can't afford to do that. So you want to acknowledge it. Here's the new things we're going to do in proposal writing. We're going to do now. He's going to play, or he or she is going to play now a role in networking. Professional advance play more of a role in this, and introducing blah 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 play a different role. And now I'm going to bring other people in to complement this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
If you're gonna, if you're gonna do that, then you want to build in, and this new mentor I'm working with, she's really interested in the work I'm working on, and she has helped me develop this proposal. We're already working together. So you want to make it sure we're already working together, not if you give me the grant, we're going to start working together. No, we're going to work together whether you give us the money or not. And we've already started doing this. That's what you want to try to capture when you bring in new people like that.
Awesome. Thank you.
And don't feel like you have to have published with them or anything like that. Absolutely not. No, it's
Okay.
a development, yeah. But just that you have a relationship with them of some form. Great question though. Okay. All right.
I have a
Oh yeah.
question.
Sure. Yeah.
So going through the review criteria for the K was really helpful. And I'm just curious, are the reviewers for the K-12 using that K-08 criteria and answering those same questions as they review, or is there a separate set of criteria?
No, they really are pretty much the same. Those are pretty much standard, you know, and again, but remind me, how long is your K-12? How many years?
3.
3, yeah. And that's why, that's why it's gonna be a little bit more compact.
Got it.
Yeah, and it depends if you're if you're just getting started and your goal after the K-12 is another 2 or 3 years of K, that's fine. If you're a little further along and you think I don't need more than 3, I want to get going, and if you can make that case, make the case for what you're going to be needing after the K in terms of whether you need more training or not. So that's where you have to customize everyone for the different pieces. Yep. Cool. Okay, easy, just go do it, right? Just find one and model it. No, but the last thing I want to lead you with is actually what I've discovered is a pretty effective way, more effective in a lot of ways than sending a mentor, 2 pages of writing and say, yeah, I'll get it back to you tomorrow. Well, tomorrow becomes a week, and what you get back is, so a lot of our feedback has all been in writing. I want to introduce you the idea of getting verbal feedback, especially in early writing. Because you think about it, it's all teaching and learning is you learn something, you try it, you get feedback. The shorter the feedback cycle, the more rapid you develop, and the more rapid, and that's like you play tennis, that's why you learn to play tennis by hitting against a ball machine, because it keeps coming at you, coming at you, coming at you. You don't play out in a field where you're running around chasing balls all the time. So it's a matter of how do you get that immediate and rapid feedback. And like, again, typically we've used I would actually argue in my case that the degree people have gotten feedback along the way, if I could prove it, I think it would almost be, highly correlated with actually getting funding, because it's that iterative feedback, improvement cycle, which makes all the difference in the world. So, but again, typically, so you all know what getting written feedback is about. You've had, success with it. Some of you wouldn't be here. You've done it with paper writing, but in writing proposals, it gets cumbersome. And it gets cumbersome because writing the proposal is iterative thinking about the future. Writing papers is all about the past. Everybody has the same knowledge. Here's what it's coming. You're just writing about the past. Proposal writing is about the future. And it's all these different pieces, particularly with a K. So I think where written feedback, it can have some strengths. Maybe you take a little time with it. You can do it while you're flying. You can get and sending, right. But it's, and can be very thoughtful and considered. But the problem is it's hard to get detail. And so even me, it's my job, I will never type as much as I will talk. And even if I have writing a sticky note or writing something, you'll get kind of a Cliff's Note version of what my brain is thinking. And typing is very slow. I learned how to type in high school. It's probably the most important thing I came out of high school with at that point, but it's slow compared to talking. And sometimes you get things, well, looks fine to me, which basically says, well, I didn't really have time to read it, but I got to get it back to you. So there's some limitations. So what we've really moved into, I'd say 90% of what we do is actually oral or verbal feedback. And it's in a way that it also replicates much more closely the reviewer and what they're thinking. So we've moved into the, like literally either with me individually or in a writing group, we'll say, okay, let's put a draft of your AIMS page up on the screen. I'm going to read the first paragraph. I'm going to tell you, okay, while I'm reading the first paragraph, this is what my brain is doing. I will literally display to you the complete cognition that your words have created in my brain. And all of a sudden say, from your topic sentence, this is what I'm expecting the paragraph to be. I kind of got in the middle of the paragraph here, and it kind of doesn't feel like where I thought it was going to be. And I've gotten to the end of this paragraph, and I really don't know where I'm going. How long would it take me to write that to you, send it to you, and then you come back with another draft with me several days later? Instead, let's talk about it. So literally in real time, we start revising, we start thinking, we start getting the sense of, okay, here's what's going on. Here's what I was trying to say. Oh, okay, now I know what you're trying to say. What if you said it this way? You can accomplish in a half an hour of dialogue on an Ames page what may take 2 weeks to accomplish in going back and forth in written documents. So that literally has become the core feedback methodology that I use most of the time. And it's either individually, but again, and then the thing is, because then you can reveal your thinking and you can revise it, and you're now practicing it from a teaching and learning perspective. You're practicing and getting feedback. So or if it's in a small group, that's why typically I work with 3 to 5 people at a time. Everybody gets to practice. Everybody comes up with ideas, and it's perfect, and it's very efficient because I purposely don't read anything ahead of time. So it's a matter of, it's not like I have to do it, write it all up, and then tell you about it. No, that takes too much time. But there I'm thinking out loud, and in groups are thinking out loud. It's kind of fluid. It's kind of making it up and kind of revising it as you go. And you can't capture it writing, so we're always recording. So we either use resume recording. I've got recorders I always carry with me to stick in my ear. A phone is great for recording because then you got it all. You go back to the next version and you can incorporate everything that your brain has forgotten during that point. And it, like, okay, here's an example. You got a mentor, okay? In the next 30 minutes of our meeting, I'd like to have you read my Ames page, paragraph by paragraph, and tell me what you take away from the paragraph. What you're wondering, what's making sense, what not telling you, what not. That way you still want to know. That way I can understand what my writing will read like for a reviewer, and you don't have to waste your time typing. Send that to someone who you're working with. We can talk through ways to fill in what's missing, get rid of what's not needed, move toward a compelling rationale for what I plan to do. So I don't have to try to type notes as fast as we talk. I would just record a conversation, blah, blah, blah. So you're literally setting someone up if you're going to try to do this with someone, and the expectation of it's more efficient for them, and you want to understand fully what they're thinking by letting them just think out loud from the standpoint as you're writing. And again, it requires you to be in the same place at the same time, so you don't have the advantage of that. But try it sometime, or even try it with colleagues. You guys are all enough, for example, in the similar field. You could even do it with each other, or someone a more advanced person. But you're looking for just not critique. You never want to say, I want you to, people say, well, I want you to rip it apart. No, I don't critique anything. I will tell you what my brain is thinking. But it's not a matter of good or bad. It's just, here's what your words are doing. Let's get this polished to the point where it's actually saying what you want to do. And that dialogue will get much more rapidly into even thinking about research design, because the pathways to it and you get to the rationale for it, I think can be very helpful. So I'm going to stop there, obviously time. And again, if you have the luxury of doing it in a small group, again, this is my day job. So you can see why I have this great job. I just get to do this and help people develop ideas. And you can imagine the things that I see, the things that I get involved with are just amazing. So, but again, it's impossible to become a skilled writer by yourself. That's the bottom line. You just simply can't do it, because it's just, it just takes too much. So just some take-home messages. That's me. Happy to interact with anybody individual if I can be helpful. And I think, we're skipping this one. I took this out. Well, the K to R1 is a big step, but anyway, that's on the line. That's after you get the K. Right, there it is. Crash course.